Arrows fell like storm. Part 1. The crashed ship. The ship was dying. Park Doan knew this because the walls were screaming. Metal twisted and groaned as fire ate through the hull. Red lights flashed everywhere. Alarms filled the air with sharp, angry sounds that made his ears hurt. He was not supposed to be on this ship. He was a ranger, a soldier and observer from Earth. The Terran Coalition had sent him to study the Viren, to learn their ways, to build trust between two very different species. For 3 months, he had lived among them. He had eaten their food. He had learned some of their words. He had watched them hunt. The Viren were terrifying to most species in the galaxy. They stood 8 feet tall, covered in thick scales that could stop a blade. They had 4 arms, each ending in claws that could tear through metal. Their eyes glowed amber in the dark, like burning coals. When they moved like water, smooth and silent and deadly. Most species called them monsters, predators, killers. But Dohan had learned something else. He had seen Viorn mothers hold their cubs with gentle care. He had watched Viorn fathers teach their young ones to hunt with patience and love. He had heard them sing soft songs in the night, songs about family and honor and the stars. The Viorn loved their children more than anything in the universe. Now the ship was falling, and Dohan could do nothing but hold on. The craft had been on a simple patrol mission near Kellis 4, a jungle planet at the edge of contested space. Something had gone wrong. An engine failure, maybe. Or an attack, he did not know. All he knew was that one moment they were flying steady, and the next moment the world turned upside down. He gripped the emergency handles, bolted to the wall. His body slammed left, then right. Through the small window, he saw a green, endless green rushing up to meet them. Trees, jungle, the ground. The ship hit the canopy with a sound like thunder. Everything went dark. When Dohan opened his eyes, he did not know how much time had passed. Minutes, hours. He could not tell. Sunlight came through cracks in the broken hull. Vines had already started to push through the gaps, as if the jungle was trying to swallow the ship. He tried to move and pain exploded through his body. His ribs felt like broken glass grinding together. His left arm hung at a wrong angle, swollen and purple. Blood dripped down his face from a cut on his forehead. But he was alive. He pulled himself up slowly, using his good arm to grip the twisted metal around him. The ship was destroyed. Pieces of it were scattered across the jungle floor. Smoke rose from small fires that still burned in the wreckage. Then he heard the sound. It was soft at first. A whimper. A cry. The sound of something small and scared. Dohan followed it. He climbed over broken walls and pushed through hanging wires. Each step sent pain shooting through his body, but he did not stop. The sound grew louder, closer. He found them in what remained of the cargo bay. 3 Viorn cubs huddled together in the corner. They were small, barely reaching his waist. Their scales were soft, not yet hardened by age. Their claws were short and dull. Their amber eyes were wide with fear. The eldest was a female with pale green markings across her face. She had positioned herself in front of the 2 smaller ones, trying to protect them with her body. Her small chest rose and fell quickly. She was terrified, but she was not running. She was standing guard. Behind her, a male cub with dark stripes pressed against the wall. His eyes darted around, looking for danger. And the smallest, a tiny female with spots like stars on her scales, was crying. Soft, keening sounds came from her throat. The sound that Viorn cubs made when they were scared beyond words. Around them lay the adults. Dohan counted 5 bodies. The pilot, the navigator, 2 hunters, and the cub's mother. He recognized her markings. She had spoken to him once, asking about human children, curious about how his species raised their young. She was gone now. They were all gone. The eldest cub saw him and hissed. It was a weak sound, more fear than threat. She raised her small claws, ready to fight even though she had no chance of winning. Dahan stopped. He lowered himself slowly, carefully, until he was kneeling. He made himself small, less threatening. "It's okay," he said softly. His voice was rough from the crash. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cub did not understand his words. The Viron language was different from Terran Standard, and cubs this young had not yet learned other tongues. But she understood his tone. She understood his posture. Slowly, very slowly, she lowered her claws. Dahan looked at the three of them. 3 children, alone on a hostile world. Their parents were dead. Their ship was destroyed. They had no one except him. He thought about what he should do. The smart thing would be to find a way to call for rescue, to focus on his own survival. He was wounded. He was weak. Taking care of 3 alien cubs would make everything harder. But when he looked at them, at their scared eyes, at the way the eldest tried so hard to be brave, at the smallest one crying in the corner, he could not walk away. He was a ranger. He protected people. It did not matter what species they were. "Okay," he said quietly, more to himself than to them. "Okay, I've got you." He did not know if they understood, but the eldest cub tilted her head, watching him with those amber eyes. Something in her gaze shifted. Not trust, not yet, but something close to hope. Dahan stood up slowly. He looked around the wreckage and started to make a plan. He needed supplies, water, food, medical equipment, weapons if he could find them, because he knew where they were. Kellis 4, a planet claimed by the Morath Collective, a species that had been at war with the Varan for hundreds of years. The Morath hated everything with scales. They called the Vair monsters abominations, creatures that deserved only death. If the Morath found these cubs, they would not show mercy. Dahan looked at the 3 children. Then he looked at the jungle beyond the broken hull. He did not know what was coming. He did not know if he could protect them. But he knew one thing with perfect certainty. He was going to try. Arrows fell like storm. Part 2. The hostile world, the jungle of Kellis 4, wanted to kill them. Dahan understood this on the first day. The air was thick and wet, like breathing through a warm cloth. Strange insects buzzed around their heads, some as big as his fist. The trees rose so high that their tops disappeared into mist. Vines hung everywhere, some covered in thorns, others dripping with liquids that burned the skin. And the sounds. The jungle was never quiet. Creatures called to each other in the darkness between the trees. Some sounds were high and sharp. Others were low and rumbling. Dahan did not know which animals made those sounds, but he knew they were not friendly. He walked at the front. His broken arm hung useless at his side, wrapped in cloth torn from his uniform. His ribs screamed with every step. The fever had started on the second day, a slow heat that crept into his bones and made the world swim before his eyes. But he kept walking. Behind him, the 3 cubs followed in silence. He had given them names in his head. Names from his home, from Korea, from a world so far away it felt like a dream. The eldest was Iziel. The name meant morning dew in his language. He called her this because her pale green scales caught the light in a beautiful way, shining like water drops on leaves. She was brave, this one. She watched everything with careful eyes. She helped the smaller ones over fallen logs and through thick bushes. She was only a child, but she had become a protector. The middle cub was Taiyang. It meant sun. Dahan called him this because the boy kept looking up at the sky, searching for the light through the canopy. Maybe he was looking for rescue ships. Maybe he was just looking for hope. His dark stripes made him hard to see in the shadows, and he moved quietly. like a little ghost. The smallest was Bile. Star. She had spots on her scales that looked like a night sky, bright against dark blue. She was the one who cried the most. She was the one who missed her mother. But she was also the one who kept going, step after step, holding on to Isail's hand with all her strength. They did not speak Terran standard. Dohan knew only a few words of yarn, but they had learned to communicate in other ways. Hand signals, facial expressions, tone of voice. When Dohan pointed, they followed. When he held up his hand, they stopped. When he smiled, they seemed to relax. Just a little. Food was a problem. Dohan had found 2 ration packs in the wreckage, enough for maybe 4 days if he did not eat at all. He gave everything to the cubs. They needed the energy more than he did. Their small bodies were not built for this kind of journey. He drank water from the purifier he had salvaged. He chewed on leaves that he hoped were not poisonous. His stomach was a hollow pit, but he ignored it. There were more important things than his hunger. On the 3rd night, they stopped in a small clearing to rest. Dohan sat with his back against a tree, his sidearm in his good hand. 12 rounds. That was all he had. 12 chances to protect these children if something attacked. Bile crawled over to him. She looked up at his face with those big amber eyes, still wet from crying. Then, slowly, she curled up against his side and closed her eyes. Dohan did not move. He barely breathed. A moment later, Taiyang came too. Then Isail. They pressed against him, seeking warmth, seeking safety. Their scales were surprisingly soft against his skin. They smelled like rain and something sweet, like flowers. He looked down at them. 3 alien children, predator cubs, members of a species that most of the galaxy feared. And they were trusting him. A strange creature from a distant world. A human dot. Something shifted in his chest. Something warm and fierce. He would not let them down. On the 4th day, they found a cave dot. It was hidden behind a waterfall, tucked into a cliff face covered in moss. The entrance was narrow, just wide enough for Dohan to squeeze through. Inside, the cave opened into a larger space, dry and cool and protected from the jungle dot. It was perfect. Dohan spent hours preparing the space. He gathered soft leaves for bedding. He collected water from the fall. He built a small fire near the entrance, using sparks from his emergency kit. The smoke would keep insects away and provide warmth for the cubs. That night, for the first time since the crash, the children slept peacefully. Dohan did not sleep. He sat at the cave entrance, watching the jungle, listening to every sound. His fever was worse now. His arm had turned dark colors that worried him. But he pushed the fear away. He could not be sick. He could not be weak. Not now. The cubs needed him. On the 5th day, the Morath found them. Dohan had been gathering fruit near the cave when he heard the sounds. Footsteps. Many footsteps. And voices speaking in a language he recognized from his training. Morath thought he dropped the fruit and ran back to the cave. The cubs were inside, playing some quiet game with stones they had collected. When they saw his face, they stopped. They knew something was wrong. Dohan pointed to the back of the cave. He put his finger to his lips. Be quiet. Hide. Isail understood immediately. She grabbed her siblings and pulled them into the shadows, pressing them against the cold stone wall. Her eyes met Dohan's for just a moment. He nodded at her. Then he turned and walked to the cave entrance. The Morath were already there. There were 12 of them. Tall creatures, taller than humans with lean bodies covered in short gray fur. Their faces were long and narrow, with sharp teeth and eyes that reflected the light like mirrors. They carried weapons, bows made of dark wood and metal, arrows tipped with gleaming points. They had been hunting. And now they had found their prey. The leader stepped forward. She was a female, scarred across her face, with ritual markings painted on her fur. She looked at Dahan with cold curiosity. "Human?" she said in broken Terran standard. "You are far from home." Dahan did not answer. He stood in the cave entrance, his body filling the gap, his sidearm in his hand. The leader tilted her head. Her eyes moved past him into the darkness of the cave. She smiled a slow, cruel expression that showed all her teeth. "We tracked the Vioran ship. We followed the trail. We know what you have in there." Her voice was like ice. "3 cubs. Scaled ones. Monsters in small bodies. They're children," Dahan said. "They are Vioran." The leader spat the word like poison. "They will grow. They will hunt. They will kill our people like their parents did. Like their grandparents did. Like all of their cursed kind has done for centuries." She stepped closer. The other Morith raised their bows. "Step aside, human. This is not your war. This is not your fight. Give us the cubs, and you can go free. We have no quarrel with Earth." Dahan looked at her. He thought about his wounds, his fever, his 12 rounds against 12 hunters. He thought about the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Then he thought about Ezil standing guard over her siblings, Taiyang looking for the sun, Bile crying for her mother. He did not move. "They're children," he said again, "and they're under my protection." The leader's smile faded. Something dark entered her eyes. "Then you die with them." Arrows fell like storm. Part 3. The siege begins. The jungle had gone quiet. Even the insects stopped their endless buzzing, as if the whole world was holding its breath. The only sounds were the soft rush of the waterfall and the pounding of Dahan's heart in his ears. 12 Morith hunters stood before him. 12 bows, each with an arrow ready. 12 pairs of silver eyes watching him with cold hatred. And behind him, in the darkness of the cave, 3 children waited in silence. The Morith leader, the scarred female, with ritual markings, studied Dahan like he was a puzzle she could not solve. Her head tilted to one side, then the other. The movement was strange, animal-like. "You confuse me, human," she said slowly. "Your species is young, weak. You have no scales, no claws, no natural weapons. You should not be brave. You should not be foolish." "Maybe I'm both," Dahan replied. His voice was steady, but his body was not. The fever made his hands shake. His broken arm throbbed with each heartbeat. Standing upright took all the strength he had left. The leader laughed a short, harsh sound. "You are dying. I can smell it on you. Infection. Fever. Your body is giving up." She pointed at him with one long finger. "You could not stop us even if you wanted to. Then why are we still talking?" The question hung in the air. Something flickered across the leader's face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. It was hard to tell. "Because I am curious," she admitted. "I have studied humans. Your coalition. Your history. You are a young species, but you have done strange things. You have fought wars that made no sense. You have died for causes that brought you no benefit. You are unusual." She stepped closer. The other Morith shifted, their bows creaking as they adjusted their aim. "But this," the leader continued, "this I do not understand. These are not your children. These are not even your species. They are Vioan, the Scaled Ones, the monsters that have killed our people for 1,000 years. Why would you die for them?" Dahan thought about the question. He thought about his training, his mission, his duty. He thought about the reports he had read about the Var Morith War, centuries of blood and hate. Atrocities on both sides, wounds that never healed. But when he opened his mouth, none of that came out. "Because they're scared," he said simply. "Because they're alone. Because their parents are dead and they have no one else." He paused. "Because someone has to." The leader stared at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly. You are a fool, human. A strange, soft, dying fool. She raised her hand, ready to signal her hunters. But I will remember you. That is something. Wait. The word came from Dawn's mouth before he could stop it. The leader paused, her hand still raised. What do you know about honor? Dawn asked. The leader's eyes narrowed. We are Morth. We know more about honor than your species has existed. Then, you know that killing children, any children, is not honorable. It's not brave. It's not justice. Dawn's voice grew stronger. You call the VRN monsters. But what do you call someone who murders babies in a cave? A ripple went through the Morth hunters. Some of them exchanged glances. The leader's jaw tightened. They will grow into monsters, she said, but her voice had changed. Less certain. Maybe. Or maybe they'll grow into something else. Maybe they'll remember that a Morth had mercy. Maybe that will change things. Things do not change. The war does not change. Wars end, Dohan said. They always end. The only question is how many children have to die first. Silence fell over the clearing. The leader stood very still, her silver eyes fixed on Dohan's face. He could see the thoughts moving behind those eyes. The calculations. The old hatred fighting against something newer, something uncertain. For a moment, just a moment, he thought she might lower her hand. He thought she might turn away. Then one of the younger hunters spoke. His voice was sharp with anger. Why do we listen to this human? He is nothing. He is one wounded creature with a small weapon. We are 12. We have our duty. Our ancestors demand blood. The other hunters made sounds of agreement. Their bows rose higher. The moment of doubt passed from the leader's face, replaced by cold resolution. The young one is right, she said quietly. I am curious about you, human. But curiosity does not outweigh 1,000 years of war. She lowered her raised hand in a swift motion. Take aim. Dahan moved. He threw himself backward through the cave entrance, just as the first arrow flew. It passed through the space where his chest had been a heartbeat before and clattered against the stone wall behind him. Inside the cave, he could hear Bile start to cry. Iziel was whispering something soft VRN words, maybe a prayer, maybe just comfort for her siblings. Dawn looked around the small space. The cave entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for one person. That was good. They could only come at him one at a time. But arrows could fly through easily, and he had nothing to block them. Nothing except his eyes fell on a piece of hull plating he had dragged from the wreckage days ago. He had used it as a work surface, a place to prepare food and organize supplies. It was heavy, too heavy for him to lift easily, especially with one arm useless and fever burning through his body. But it might stop arrows. He grabbed the plating with his good hand and dragged it toward the entrance. Every movement sent fire through his ribs. His vision blurred. Sweat ran down his face. Outside, he could hear the Morth spreading out, taking positions around the cave. They were not rushing in. They were being careful. Professional Duhun reached the entrance and lifted the plating. His muscles screamed. His broken arm exploded with pain as he accidentally put weight on it. But he got the metal up, braced against his shoulder, covering the cave mouth just in time. The arrows came. The first volley hit the plating with sounds like hammer blows. The force pushed Doan back a step, then another step. But he dug his heels in and held. More arrows came. And more. The Morth were firing in waves, trying to punch through the metal, trying to find gaps, trying to bring him down. Behind him, Bile's crying grew louder. Tai Yang was making small sounds of fear. Only Iziel was silent. He could feel her eyes on his back, watching him, believing in him. Dohan's arm shook. His legs trembled. Blood from his old wounds soaked through his bandages. The fever made the world spin, but he did not move. The arrows fell like rain against his shield. Each impact shook his bones. Each second felt like an hour. The Moriths shouted to each other, calling out positions, adjusting their aim. One arrow slipped past the edge of the plating and caught his thigh. The pain was sharp and bright, like a lightning strike. He grunted but did not fall. Another arrow grazed his shoulder, tearing cloth and skin. Blood ran down his arm, dripping from his fingers. Still, he did not move. Outside, the Morith leader watched with growing frustration. This human should have fallen by now. He should have collapsed from his wounds, surrendered from his pain, given up like any sensible creature would. But he stood there, bleeding and shaking, holding a piece of metal like it was the last wall in the universe, and he would not move. Arrows fell like storm. Part 4. Arrows fell like storm. Time lost all meaning. Doan did not know how long he stood there. Minutes felt like hours. Hours might have been minutes. The world had narrowed to a single point. The weight of the metal in his hands, the impact of arrows against it, the sound of children breathing behind him. The arrows kept coming. The Morith were relentless. They fired in waves, 3 or 4 at a time, aiming for different parts of the shield. They were looking for weaknesses, looking for gaps, looking for the moment when his strength would finally fail. Dahan's good arm burned with exhaustion. The muscles had gone past pain into something worse, a deep, trembling numbness that warned of collapse. His broken arm hung useless, but even that hurt. Everything hurt. His ribs, his thigh where the arrow had hit, his shoulder that was still bleeding. The fever made the world swim. Sometimes the Morith blurred into gray shadows. Sometimes the cave walls seemed to bend and twist. He blinked hard, forcing himself to focus. He could not pass out. He could not fall. If he fell, the children died. So he stood. Behind him, Bile had stopped crying. The little one had pressed her face into Asil's chest, hiding from the terrible sounds. Taiyang sat with his back against the wall, his small claws digging into the stone. His amber eyes were fixed on Dahan's back with an expression that was hard to read. Fear, yes, but something else too. Wonder. Maybe Izzy Yuel had not moved from her position guarding her siblings. She watched everything. The arrows hitting the shield, the blood dripping down Dahan's leg, the way his body shook with each impact. She was young, but she understood what was happening. She understood what this human was doing for them, and she would never forget. Outside, the Morith leader raised her hand. The arrows stopped. Dahan did not lower his shield. He barely dared to breathe. "You are still standing," the leader called out. Her voice carried a note of disbelief. That should not be possible. Dahan did not answer. He did not have the breath for words. The leader stepped forward, moving into view at the edge of the cave entrance. She was staying out of his line of fire. He still had his sidearm, though using it would mean dropping the shield. "I have seen many enemies," she said slowly. "There are warriors in their battle armor. Other species fighting for their lives. Soldiers with nothing left to lose." Her silver eyes studied him. "None of them looked like you. None of them stood the way you stand." Dahan forced words out through cracked lips. "Just getting started." It was a lie. They both knew it. He was barely upright. Another few minutes and his body would give out whether he wanted it to or not. But the lie mattered. The defiance mattered. Because the Morith respected strength, and right now, his will was the only strength he had left. The leader made a gesture. 4 hunters moved forward, their bows drawn. "We will try something different," she said. "Continuous fire. No breaks. Let us see how long your arms can hold." The arrows came faster than before. They hit the shield in a constant stream, thunk, 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 each impact pushing Dahan back. each one stealing a little more of his strength. He braced his feet against the stone floor. He leaned into the shield with his whole body. He made himself a wall. One arrow found the gap between the shield and the cave wall. It caught his side, slicing through cloth and skin. He felt the hot blood running down to his hip. Another arrow went low, punching into his already wounded thigh. His leg buckled. He caught himself, forced the leg to straighten, refused to fall. The pain was beyond words now. It was not sharp or burning or aching. It was everything. It filled his whole body, his whole mind, his whole world. There was nothing except pain and the weight of metal and the sound of arrows. And still he held. Taiyang made a small sound, a whimper of fear. Do-han heard it through the chaos. He thought about the boy, about the son he kept searching for, about the future he might have if he survived this day. He thought about Bile, so small, crying for her mother. She would never see her mother again. But maybe she would see tomorrow. Maybe she would grow up. Maybe someday she would have cubs of her own and tell them about the strange human who stood in a cave and would not move. He thought about Isil, so brave, so determined. She reminded him of his sister back on Earth. His sister who would never know what happened to him on this distant world. He thought about Earth, green hills, blue oceans, the smell of rain in spring, his mother's cooking, his father's laugh, home. He would never see home again. He knew this now. His body was failing. The wounds were too many, the fever too strong. Even if the Marath left, he might not survive the night, but the children might. That was enough. Do-han felt his arm giving out. The shield started to lower, millimeter by millimeter. His vision was going dark at the edges. The world was fading. No. He reached down into somewhere deep inside himself. Past the pain, past the exhaustion, past the limits of what a human body should be able to do. He found something there, a spark of stubborn fire that refused to die. He screamed. It was not a word. It was not a battle cry. It was raw human will turned into sound, a roar of defiance against death itself. He pushed the shield back up. He locked his arm. He planted his feet. The arrows kept falling, and Park Do-han did not move. The Morath leader watched with wide eyes. She had seen warriors fall. She had seen heroes die. But she had never seen anything like this, a broken, bleeding creature holding back death through nothing but sheer refusal to surrender. Something changed in her expression. The cold hatred softened. The certainty cracked. She raised her hand again. The arrows stopped. The silence was sudden and complete. Do-han stood swaying in the cave entrance, more blood than man, held up by nothing but will. The shield in his hand was covered in arrows, bristling like a metal porcupine. The leader walked forward slowly. She stopped just a few meters away, looking at him with an expression he could not read. Why? She asked. Her voice was quiet now, almost gentle. Why do you do this? They're not your people. This is not your war. You gain nothing from this. Do-han looked at her through eyes that could barely see. Because someone has to, he whispered. Because they're just kids. Because if I move, they die. He swallowed. Blood ran from the corner of his mouth, and I'm not moving. The leader stared at him for a long, long moment. Then she turned and walked back to her hunters. Arrows fell like storm. Part 5. What the galaxy lured. The Morath leader stood among her hunters. They watched her with uncertain eyes, waiting for the command to resume firing. The human was nearly finished. One more volley, maybe two, and he would fall. The cubs would be defenseless. Victory was moments away. But the leader did not give the command. She stood with her back to the cave, her scarred face turned toward the jungle. Her hunters exchanged confused glances. The youngest one, the Sang who had spoken before, stepped forward. Commander? Your orders? She did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was strange, thoughtful. My grandmother told me stories, she said slowly. Stories about the old wars, before the Viorn were our only enemy. She spoke of species that fought not for territory or resources, but for ideas, for principles, for things that could not be touched or owned. She turned to look at the cave, at the humans still standing in the entrance, swaying like a tree in a storm, refusing to fall. I thought those stories were myths, fairy tales for cubs. Her silver eyes reflected the light. I was wrong. The young hunter frowned. Commander, he's one human. He protects monsters. Our duty, the leader interrupted, is to our people, to our future. She paused. Tell me, when we return home and tell this story, what will we say? The 12 Marth hunters killed 3 cubs while they hid behind a dying human? She shook her head. That is not a story of victory. That is a story of shame. Silence fell over the hunters. Some of them lowered their bows, just slightly. Others looked away. The leader made her decision. We leave, she said. Now, the young hunter stepped forward in protest. But Commander, I have spoken. Her voice was iron. The cubs will live. The human will probably die from his wounds. The jungle will do our work for us. She turned away from the cave. We lose nothing, and we gain something far more valuable. What? The leader smiled a strange, almost sad expression. A story worth telling. One by one, the Marth lowered their bows. One by one, they turned away from the cave. The leader took a last look at the human standing in the entrance, broken, bleeding, barely alive, but still upright. You are either the bravest creature I have ever met, she said quietly, or the most foolish. Dohan's lips moved. His voice was barely a whisper. Maybe both. The leader laughed softly. Then she and her hunters disappeared into the jungle, moving like ghosts of the green shadows. They were gone. Duhan stood in the cave entrance for 3 more heartbeats. Then his legs gave out. He fell. The shield clattered to the ground. His body followed, crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Isil's face, amber eyes wide, soft claws reaching for him. Then nothing. He woke to warmth. Soft warmth pressed against his side. Small sounds, not crying, but something gentler. Purring, almost. He opened his eyes slowly, expecting to see the cold stone ceiling of the cave. The ceiling was there. But so were the cubs. His EUL was curled against his uninjured side, her pale green scales warm against his skin. Taiyang sat at the cave entrance, watching the jungle with serious eyes, standing guard, like he had seen Dohan do. And Bile was asleep on his chest, her small claws tangled in his torn shirt, her breath soft and steady. Dawn stared at them for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he placed his good hand on Bile's back. She stirred but did not wake, just pressed closer to him and continued sleeping. Something wet rolled down his cheek. He was not sure if it was sweat or tears. 3 days later, the Vion rescue ship found them. The ship descended through the canopy like a silver bird, its engines roaring as it landed in the clearing near the cave. Vion warriors in full battle armor rushed out, weapons ready, expecting a fight. They found a human. He was sitting at the cave entrance, too weak to stand. 3 cubs were clustered around him, one on his lap, one at his side. One standing in front of him with her small claws raised, ready to protect him the way he had protected her. The rescue team stopped in their tracks. For a long moment, no one spoke. The warriors stared at the scene before them. The wounded human, the living cubs, the signs of battle around the cave, the arrows embedded in metal, the blood on the stones. Then one of the warriors, an old female with silver scales and wise eyes, stepped forward. She looked at Doan. She looked at the cubs. She understood. She bowed her head. It was a gesture of deep respect. The highest honor a Viren could give to an outsider. The other warriors followed her example. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. A human, one wounded. Alone, unarmed human had stood against a Morath hunting party. He had taken their arrows in his body. He had held a wall of metal for hours. And he had not moved, not fallen, not surrendered. Not for glory. Not for politics. Not for gain. For 3 children who were not even his species. The Morath Collective sent a formal message to the Terran Coalition. It contained only one line. We understand now why the humans do not fear death. The Vioran High Council requested an immediate meeting with the Terran ambassador. When Ambassador Yoon Somi arrived on the Vioran homeworld, she expected a formal discussion, treaties, negotiations, politics. Instead, she found the entire council standing. In Vioran culture, standing for a visitor was the highest honor. It meant equality. It meant respect. It meant brotherhood. No other species had ever received this gesture. The eldest counselor stepped forward. He was ancient. His scales faded to pale gray, his amber eyes dimmed by age. But when he spoke, his voice was strong. We have called humans many things, he said. Soft, weak, prey-shaped. We looked at your bodies, no claws, no scales, no natural weapons, and we thought we understood you. He paused. We were wrong. He turned to look at a screen on the wall. It showed an image of Doan still recovering in a Viren medical facility, with 3 cubs piled on his bed, refusing to leave his side. Your ranger stood before death and did not flinch. He bled for children who were not his own. He held the line when no one asked him to, when no one expected him to, when the logical choice was to walk away. The counselor's eyes burned. That is not weakness. That is strength we have never seen before. Ambassador Yoon bowed her head. He did what any good human would do. No, the counselor said firmly. He did what the best of any species should do. And that is why we are standing. That is why we will remember. The Viren do not forget our debts. He placed a clawed hand over his heart. Your people have our friendship, now and forever. Across the galaxy, species that had dismissed humanity as young and fragile began to reconsider. They had seen humans as soft, as weak, as prey in a universe of predators. But they had not understood what softness could become when it chose to stand firm. They had not understood what weakness could become when it refused to yield. They had not understood that the same species that made art and music and gentle things could also make itself into a wall that death could not pass. On 100 worlds, 1,000 stations, 1,000,000 screens, the story spread. It changed in the telling, grew larger, grew brighter, became legend. But the core remained true. A human had shielded predator cubs with his body. Arrows had fallen like storm around him. And he had not moved. Park Do-hung recovered slowly. The fever broke. The wounds healed. The broken arm mended, but he was never truly alone again. Isiel stayed close to him, watching over him like a small guardian. Taiyang brought him things: interesting rocks, pretty leaves, small gifts from the jungle. Bile slept beside him every night, curled against his side, her star-spotted scales glowing softly in the dark. The Vioran offered to adopt him into their clans. The Terran Coalition wanted to give him medals. News organizations begged for interviews. Du-Han said no to all of it. He just wanted to rest, to heal, to watch 3 cubs grow up safe and happy. That was enough. Years later, when Isiel was grown tall and strong and beautiful, a leader among her people, she was asked about the human who had saved her life. She thought for a long moment. Then she smiled. He taught me what courage really means, she said. It is not about being strong. It is not about being unafraid. It is about standing in the doorway when everything tells you to run. It is about holding the line when the arrows fall. Her amber eyes glowed with warmth. The arrows fell like storm that day, and my human did not move. And across the galaxy, everyone remembered.